All right, so hey everybody, welcome back. So we are in the middle, well actually maybe the beginning of creating a component where we show a video and use TensorFlow.js to visualize and report on different key points along your body or your face or even your hands. So you'll be able to see that at the end of this project. But for now, all we've done so far is created a new project on GitHub from a template provided by Lit. Google's Lit. And it's been going really well so far, but we don't have too much done. We do have some video playback. So let me show you this. We've started up our server and we have a nice demo page. There are no video controls here yet. So we have to use a separate button to call into our component and start our demo video, our sample video. And again, this is just basic video playback. And even though our component so far, we haven't needed to bring in Lit or any other helper libraries to make our video player component, I think it's time, since we're going to be doing some UI and there's going to be some state and, we're going to be rendering lots of different markup to represent our UI controls that belong in the bottom of this player right here. I think we do need to bring in Lit now, or we don't need to, but it's gonna help us out a lot. So let's get going with that. I've created a few of these components for UI controls beforehand. I don't think it's worth going into how they're created because they're pretty standard UI components. You can find out how to do these anywhere. You can look at the code on how I've done these. So I'm just gonna copy them in and they will be our UI components. So you can see right here, I'm copying in a button, some icons for that button, a play button, the playback controls, which will hold all of the playback controls and sit at the base of our player. And I'm going to copy in a timeline, which is kind of that scrubbable thing that you can jump back and forth in time, and a toggle button. So we want to be able to turn things on and off, leave them in that state. And this is a tiny little button component, really minimal, that does that for us. So I'm going to add these to our project. So now with those files dropped in, I'm going to give TypeScript a quick build and generate the transpiled JavaScript here. We can scroll down and see that we now have a UI folder at the base level of this component. And these are all our JavaScript files, our TypeScript definition, our map files. And again, it's new to me that these files are generated at the root of the component. And I think at the end of this project, you'll see why it's a lot easier to publish things. Normally, I have my TypeScript file generated right alongside in the source folder. So this is a little bit different. You also might notice that, I am not really in development mode right now. It's not watching my TypeScript files, compiling them automatically, and then serving them. I could start a simultaneous build while I'm watching task and also a serve task to do this at the same time, but honestly, I'm just copying in files right now. I don't feel the need to go into full developer mode on this. But in the meantime, look at all of this red. This means it doesn't know whether to check it in. So this is another thing I want to get ignored. So I'm gonna ignore this entire UI folder right here. So that'll be good to go. And yeah, we don't intend to check this in anyway. This is gonna be something we publish at the end along with our component. So okay, with that out of the way, we need to add our UI to the component. So now, so far we've just created these components. We actually haven't added them to anything. You might think that we're going to add them to our video player component, but we're not going to do that because I feel like we don't want to make it part of our video player component. We want it to live outside of there because if you take a look at some of these things I've added in terms of I have a very specific background color here, very specific fonts, all of these aren't really customizable, and I could go out of my way to make them customizable, but here's what I'm going to do instead. This is kind of going to be a throwaway UI component. It's going to be something that the consumer of this component can use as an example and throw away if they want to and build their own. So we're gonna be adding these components to slots. So let's tweak our video playback component to actually accept a slot. So we're gonna go into video element, and I am going to add a slot after this video tag. And remember, this is not lit. This is just setting the inner HTML because we're not using helpers on this component. We're not using lit. So we're just adding some extra markup. Now the other thing I want to do is I want to make sure both the video and the slot, whatever the slot may be, they're both the same size and they stack up on top of each other. So I want to change the position to be absolute on all those slotted elements and the video element itself. So I'm going to add some style here. So with that all set up, the playback controls is the actual component we want to add. It holds everything. You can see inside of here, we have the play button, another button for stepping forward, stepping back, a timeline, and these are all namespace with something called pose dash. So these are the components we're building. Maybe not the most inspired component name, but we're calling this main one that we're going to stick in our video player pose playback controls. So this is what we're going to add to our demo page. So let's jump up to our demo page. And right inside our video element right here, I am going to add this child pose playback controls. So let's see if this works. And before I do forget, like I always do, this is not good enough on its own. Just adding the tag, we do have to add the script for it. So we're going to define the component with our script. So let's try this out. Right away, we can see we have some playback controls. You can press these buttons. They don't do anything yet because, again, we're not sending events yet. But you can see everything you might expect to see from these controls. And like I said before, these controls have a very custom look to them. You may not like them. I want to make them throwaway. I want to make them so you can just add them in as a slot, take them away from the slot, and you don't have controls anymore. Or you can create your own. Maybe you have some playback controls of your own that's just called playback controls. So I want this to be very customizable. So this is why I'm making this a slot. Anyway, the next step is to add in our events. So you can press that play button and it will play. So I do have an event already created, and I'll just drop this into my project here. So we'll paste that. And I called it playback event. We are subclassing events. And I was one of those people that I didn't know you could do this not so long ago. And so all we're doing is exporting a class called playback event, and it extends event. And so the constructor here, it's taking whatever parameters we want to give our subclassed event, but in the end it uses the super function of the constructor to pass in a very specific event type along with the normal object. It's bubbles, it's composed, whatever else you'd pass in a normal event. The API for the super function is the same. It's the same constructor, but we are passing it in a custom action, and this will be part of our event. So we're setting the action that we're performing to be a custom variable on our class, and these actions are going to be one of these types of things. So we're going to be toggling playback, we're going to be updating the playback time. Any one of these things could be kind of a subtype of our event, but the main event type, when you listen for the event, it's a playback controls event, and that's what we're passing in to the constructor right here for the event base class. I also did something kind of tricky here. So you're passing in the player state. So the player state, we've set that up inside the base player class. So we have an interface, a TypeScript interface, where it's just a bunch of properties. You might be looping, this is true or false. You might be recording or playing. These are all just like simple properties, mostly Booleans. It's not a complex object here, but in my playback event class, I can pass in an entire player. I can pass in this entire video element because the video element extends base player, and then base player, it extends HTML element, but it also implements player, which extends player state. So our video element right here, the thing that actually plays back the video, our component that plays back the video, it actually has to implement some form of that player state. It has to adapt to that interface. So in our constructor here, we're passing the entire player. We could pass any player state, but the player implements player state. So we can pass the entire player here. We do want to strip it down to a dictionary though. So just to be simple and we aren't affecting different things on the player object when we pass down this event. So we're going to add a custom function to our subclassed event here, our playback event, that strips all the properties down to just a simple JSON object, and this gets set to something we can publicly get on this event. You can query the action we're going to take. Are we scrubbing that timeline? Are we playing? Are we pausing? And you can also query the state. So the state being, you know, what is the state of the player? Is it playing? Is it recording? I feel like it's a lot more organized than something like a custom event where all that logic that we put in here has to be outside of the event that we're using. Everything's centralized right here. It's a lot easier to work with. Anything that deals with events, I can put it in this class and just, like I said, be a lot more organized. So now that we've created this event, we definitely want to have our playback controls fire that event out. So let's add the do action function. It's going to be real simple. It's going to create a new playback event, our subclassed event, and just dispatch it from this component. And then last thing we need to do is just import this playback event. So in no particular order, let's just start adding these events in. So let's start with this record button. So when the user clicks record, do an action. We're gonna do toggle record pose and audio because this is an audio and pose recording button. And then for this recording button that doesn't include audio, we'll add another action to record the pose. And then up here, we have a playback rate control. So this button, you toggle it on, it gets real slow. It turns the playback down to 0.1 speed or 1/10 of the speed. So when you click that button, it's going to send that event out as well. And then looping, same thing. We're going to do that action when you click it. And then we have some frame stepping buttons, step forward and step back. We're going to add some click events there. And then we're also going to add toggle playback. So with those events in place, they're firing out when the user clicks or scrubs or whatever from these playback controls. We actually need to listen to those in the player component. So we're going to listen to these on the very base level. So the class that everything extends from, our base player class, we're just going to pop a listener right in our constructor here. And of course, we do need to import playback event. So let's do that. And we do need to handle our event though. We're listening to that event. We set it to be handled by a function, a custom function in this class. So let's fill in this function. And so this custom function, this handle controls event, it's going to query the specific action or the subtype of the event because we're just listening to any playback event. And each playback event, remember, it has a custom subtype within it where it's on toggle playback or on playback time update. Any one of these could be a subtype that we sent with this event. And we're going to take action on it. So if it's toggle playback, then we're going to start playing. And we have a whole bunch of these cases for any button that's been pressed. And another function we haven't filled in yet is update controls. So something like when we press the play button, yes, it's gonna play or it's gonna pause, but we also need to update that icon on that button to reflect. So we need to send a way, for many reasons, to pass events back to our control bar. So this update controls is going to be another function right here. So I'm gonna add update controls, and this is interesting because we're operating on slots. So remember, this playback control UI, it's all a slot. It could be, you could have several different playback controls inside the same slot. We're not going to, but we want to be flexible. So we're gonna query select anything in our component that's a slot, anything in the slot, and look at all those elements. And for each element, we want to send the player state along. So it's going to find the player controls in the slot and send the state of, whether it's playing, whether it's looping, the current time, all of these things all at once. So we're updating the player control bar in that way. And now we want some specific video player logic. So I'm going to go into my video element right here. We want specific things to happen. We want to update the controls when things happen, like the video gets loaded. So one by one here, we're going to update these controls when it pauses and also when it's playing. And another thing about working with video players is that to report the current time, you kind of have to set some kind of request animation frame or interval timer. I think we're using an interval timer here, but for every time that timer updates, we want to update the controls and tell it what the current time of the playback is. So we're going to update the controls here. And then the last place we want to update these controls is when the video metadata is sent off and we finally know things like the duration and the size. So on metadata, and we're going to update the controls right here as well. So that should be everything. And you can see there was a flash. The video was loading, and then the metadata came in, and we have playback control. So let's use our actual play button and play this. And I press play, and it works. And you can see that this is the correct duration for the video, the sample video we're playing. And we're already 8 seconds into this video, so it's updating the time correctly. So this seems to be an actual functional video player. So as I keep playing this, you might notice that it does look a little weird. So the playback, the controls right here, it's set apart by a bunch of white space. And that's because our component is a specific size, and the aspect ratio means there's some space right above and right below. And so it looks weird, but it's just bleeding through to the page backgrounds. So I'm just gonna go and add a background color in our video element component, and the background color will be black. And so now that I put this in, you can see, yeah, it's black. There's some letterboxing above and below. And if the video was a different aspect ratio, you'd see it on the sides. Maybe you don't want it to be black though, and that's fine. We can go and edit our demo page and make the background color whatever we want. So let's make it this weird blue, this sky blue, I guess. So we're overriding what's inside the component with our own color on the outside and just customizing it how we want. I'm gonna take that out though because it does look a little ugly. I think I want to go with black. But anyway, yeah, with the letterboxing in place, the black letterboxing, things look pretty decent. Let's make sure we can actually make it go slow, so that works. And then if we wanted to spend time and watch to the very end, we could watch it loop as well. There's nothing to record yet, so we're not going to use these buttons right here. We're going to add that functionality in another class, our pose component class. And so the very last thing we should try out is the ability to scrub. And that just means going to any particular time in the video, and it looks like we can't do that, which is rather unfortunate. So I know exactly what's wrong here, and it's actually kind of interesting. Right out of the box, Web Dev Server is not set up to handle progressively streaming video. I'll explain more on this later, but really we're gonna have to add some middleware to our setup, not a plugin, but middleware. What does that mean? Well, it's not well documented on the Web Dev Server documentation, and that's because we're in a unique situation here. It just doesn't happen all that often. So we'll add middleware. How to do that, we're going to get into where did Web Dev Server come from, and because it's not, the folks at Modern Web did not build all this stuff from scratch. It's based on something. So we'll explore that in the next step. So stay tuned.